It begins with silence, a silence heavy enough to make the skin crawl. Somewhere in the archives of a forgotten laboratory, sealed behind doors no one dared to open, lies a story that was never meant to leave the shadows. A story about a woman who looked into the eyes of another, only to find her own staring back. But this was not a twin, not a sibling. This was something far more forbidden. She fell in love with her clone. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon before this story pulls you in too deep. Because once you step into this tale, you may never see love, identity, or even family the same way again. Cloning has always been whispered about as the forbidden science, an idea toyed with in backrooms of universities and hushed experiments that governments disowned. For most, it was speculation, conspiracy, the type of story you'd dismiss as a rumor. But in the late 20th century, as advancements in genetic research pushed past what the public was told, experiments began, some in Europe, some in the United States, and one of those experiments produced her, a woman not born, but made. She lived an ordinary life for years, unaware of her true origin, until one day she met someone familiar, someone who shouldn't exist. A man who looked too much like her, spoke with echoes of her own mannerisms. He was her double, her mirror, yet he was not just a copy. He was designed. He was her, and yet they became inseparable. People described the bond as unnatural, obsessive. To the outside world, they were two individuals deeply in love. But beneath it, behind closed doors, lay the horror no one could explain. The woman had fallen for her own genetic reflection. This is not a story of romance. This is a story of obsession, of science tampering with the sacred, of a love that blurred the very definition of humanity. And as you hear it, you may wonder, was this an accident of science? Or was it intentional, an experiment to see how far human connection could be twisted? The idea of cloning was not new. For decades, scientists had experimented with splitting cells, replicating strands of DNA, and transferring the spark of life into vessels that were not born of nature, but engineered by human hands. When Dolly the sheep was unveiled in 1996, the world gasped. But many historians argue that Dolly was never truly the first. She was merely the first revealed. Behind the curtains, trials had already been attempted, and whispers suggest that humans were not exempt. She, the woman who would unknowingly fall in love with her own reflection, may have been one of those whispered results. Born in secrecy, placed into the world with no record of her true origin, she grew up like anyone else. To her, family meant confusion. Her childhood riddled with absences and half-answers. Her birth certificate seemed almost fabricated. The names of her parents vague, as if someone had chosen placeholders rather than truths. But fate would not allow her to remain unaware. In her early 20s, she met him. At first glance, they seemed unrelated. Two strangers crossing paths in a university town, both curious, both searching. Yet when their eyes locked, something felt different. It wasn't attraction in the ordinary sense. It was recognition, and recognition can feel like destiny. The bond grew quickly, alarmingly so. Friends noticed how alike they looked, how their smiles seemed to mirror one another. People laughed. You two could be siblings, they said. But the truth was far darker. They weren't siblings. They weren't cousins. They weren't even two people. They were one, divided soon. Their connection deepened into obsession. They would spend long hours studying each other's movements, each other's words, as though both were staring into a living mirror. She confessed once that when she looked at him, she felt as though she were falling into hell herself. He replied, "Maybe that's what love is, loving yourself completely." But history teaches us something chilling. When man tampers with nature, the consequences never rest quietly. Their love was not natural. It was engineered. And if you believe the hidden records, it was no accident they found one another. By the time their relationship turned intimate, the line between love and obsession had blurred beyond recognition. To them, it felt like destiny, as though the universe had placed them in each other's path. But to anyone who knew the truth, the scientists, the quiet men in government offices who tracked these projects from the shadows, it was not destiny. It was design, somewhere, in a locked drawer of a forgotten laboratory. Their DNA files rested, identical strings of life. The woman was never meant to meet her clone. The experiment had been scattered, participants placed in different towns, their existence hidden under layers of bureaucracy and fabricated family ties. But accidents happen, and sometimes the forbidden paths are the ones most easily found. Their love was intoxicating, but beneath it was an unshakable eeriness. She would often wake in the night, staring at his face in the dim light, unsettled by how much of herself she saw in him. His jawline, his eyes, even the way he furrowed his brow when lost in thought. It was like looking into a slightly altered reflection, the same yet off by a fraction. It left her both enthralled and terrified. When they kissed, she once confessed to her journal, it felt less like two souls uniting and more like one splitting apart. "It is like I am collapsing into myself," she wrote, the ink trembling across the page. Friends and neighbors began to grow uncomfortable. They whispered behind closed doors about the couple that looked too alike. Some even avoided them altogether. But isolation only drove them closer together. They became each other's world, sealing themselves away from the judgment of others. Historians and investigators often debate whether the relationship was an accident of fate or a cruel experiment designed to test the limits of human connection. But either way, it posed a disturbing question. If love is born of recognition, what happens when what we recognize is ourselves? As their bond deepened, the world around them grew more distorted, as though reality itself was warning them of the boundary they had crossed. Neighbors spoke less, their family grew silent, and whispers replaced greetings. They no longer belonged to the community. They had become a myth in the making, a hushed tale of the couple who looked the same. The woman, now more entangled than ever, began to sense something profoundly unnatural. Her reflection in mirrors started to unsettle her. When she looked into his eyes, she swore she could see her own memories, not metaphorically but vividly, as though the past she had lived was etched in him too. He confessed to similar feelings. Sometimes he would describe a childhood moment she had never spoken aloud, yet he knew it with flawless precision. It was as if their shared DNA had carried not just the body, but fragments of memory, echoes of an identity replicated twice. Rumors began to reach farther than their town. A traveling preacher once visited, claiming he had heard of their union of mirrors. He warned of unnatural fates, of children who should never be born, and of curses that rip through generations. But the couple did not listen. To them, their connection was stronger than fear. They justified it as love that transcended explanation, though deep down, both were haunted by the same silent dread, that they were living inside an experiment, and someone, somewhere, was watching. Diaries recovered years later reveal how she battled these contradictions. Pages filled with guilt, shame, longing, and fear, all written in a hand that trembled between obsession and horror. She described nights of passion as if they were rituals merging with herself through the body of another. "I feel as though I am disappearing," she wrote, "yet I want to vanish further." The story grew heavier as she discovered she was with child. The line between forbidden and irreversible had been crossed. This was no longer a secret affair. It was a legacy forming, one that no town, no history book, and no family wanted to acknowledge. For the first time, love had turned into dread, and the question shifted. What would this child be? A symbol of love, or the living embodiment of a forbidden science? When the child was finally born, the air in that small town grew heavier, as though the earth itself had been expecting it. The midwife who assisted in the delivery refused to speak of what she saw, only whispering later that the baby's face felt too familiar. Neighbors claimed the infant's cry was unlike any they had heard before, sharp, hollow, and unsettling, as if echoing from somewhere far deeper than a newborn's lungs. The child bore uncanny features. At first glance, it seemed like any other infant, but on closer inspection, its resemblance to both mother and father was disturbingly exact. The same jawline, the same dark gaze, the same faint curl of the lips. It was as if the child had been sculpted not through nature's randomness, but through replication, a mirror upon a mirror, endlessly folding in on itself. The family kept the infant hidden, claiming sickness as an excuse for absence, but rumors crept across town like smoke from a dying fire. Some said the child's very presence was a curse. A local doctor who secretly examined the baby described it in his notes as a body in balance, yet somehow broken, symmetry too perfect, yet unsettling in its sameness. He refused to return, warning the mother that certain things should not be brought into the world. And yet, the couple pressed forward, determined to raise their child as if it were ordinary. But it was not. Strange occurrences followed the baby's arrival. Animals in the yard grew restless, often circling the home before vanishing. Neighbors avoided passing the house at night, claiming to see flickers of light in the windows when no lamps were lit. Even the church bell, they said, tolled once on its own the night the child was born. Her diaries grew more frantic. She wrote of waking in the night to hear the baby whispering, not crying, not babbling, but whispering in tones that resembled her wan voice. She confessed that looking into her child's eyes made her feel as though she were staring into her own reflection, magnified, distorted, and unblinking. "It is me," she wrote, "but not me." The more the child grew, the more it seemed less like a new life, and more like an extension of herself. Or worse, a replacement. As the child grew into its early years, its presence seemed to reshape the household entirely. Photographs taken of the family during this time, those few that survive, are chilling in their sameness. The mother and child look nearly identical, as though one were the faded echo of the other. In group portraits, neighbors whispered that the figures seemed to blur, the lines between them collapsing until they could not tell where one ended and the other began. But behind the camera, the strain grew unbearable. The townsfolk avoided the family altogether, whispering only in hushed tones about the replica child and the curse they believed it carried. No one would let their children play near the home. Invitations to gatherings, once offered reluctantly, ceased altogether. The house became an island of silence. The mother's journals revealed the depth of her unraveling mind. She began to write as if she and her child were one being, connected by an invisible thread. Her entries drifted between first person and third, between singular and plural, as if she were losing track of her own identity. When she laughs, I feel my throat move. One entry read. Another, I cannot tell if the dreams are mine or hers. The boy who had been her lover, the mirror and flesh, also began to withdraw. Once defiant, he grew quiet, keeping long hours away from home. He avoided the child's gaze entirely. Some suspected he feared it. Others believed he finally realized what they had created. A life built not from love, but from a forbidden reflection of desire and control. Still, he never left, bound perhaps by shame, fear, or a deeper curse no one could name. As the child entered its 6th year, townspeople swore the uncanny resemblance had grown even sharper. One neighbor said it was as if the girl wore her mother's skin before her time. Others whispered the child's smile would sometimes flicker into something unnatural, too wide, too precise, as though practice, not learned. The mother insisted nothing was wrong, but in her writing she confessed the truth. I see myself in her, but she is stronger, and she does not blink when I do. The tension in the home became unbearable. Whispers grew into warnings. Some said that the family's bloodline was no longer human, that they had stepped beyond the natural order. And as history has shown, such stories never fade. They only deepen into legend. By the time the child reached adolescence, the family story was already sealed in whispers, half-remembered gossip, and newspaper clippings so vague they revealed almost nothing at all. The house had fallen into disrepair, shutters hanging loose, the paint peeling like dead skin. What went on inside became the town's deepest unease. The child, nearly grown now, had developed into a perfect copy of her mother, not just in face, but in mannerisms, in gestures, in the exact tilt of the head and curve of the voice. People swore it was like watching a reflection move independently, as though the clone had fully replaced its source. The mother, meanwhile, withered into a brittle shadow, worn thin by time, obsession, and the haunting realization that she had birthed her own replacement. One neighbor recalled the final night clearly. Screams rang from the house, piercing and inhuman. Some claimed they saw 2 figures struggling in the upstairs window. Both women, both identical, fighting like mirror images bent on destruction. When the house fell silent, no one dared enter until morning. What they found remains unclear. Reports conflict. Some say the mother was gone, vanished without a trace, her belongings left untouched. Others whispered she was buried in the field behind the house, but no grave was ever marked. The child, or perhaps the clone, now fully grown, remained. She said nothing of what happened. She only stared blankly, her face so close to her mother's that it was impossible to tell which one had truly survived. Over time, the story became folklore, and then a warning, not just about forbidden science or strange love, but about the danger of staring too long at ourselves. For in that reflection, we might find something that doesn't blink, something that doesn't fade, something that refuses to be controlled. The descendants of the town still avoid the ruins of that house. Children dare each other to enter, but few last more than a minute inside. They say if you stand in front of the broken mirror that remains in the upstairs bedroom, you will not see your own reflection. Instead, you'll see her, the one who was born from her mother and her clone, still waiting, still watching, still carrying the curse of a union that should never have been.